Hi, this is Lives Touched by Pets, a podcast for those who love and are loved by pets. I'm your host, Lisa DeSatnik. I'm a certified trainer with so much potential in Cincinnati, Ohio. It is my goal that you will find personal, relatable discussions and stories aimed to inspire and educate. I'm really glad that you're here. Welcome. Has your dog ever growled, snapped, lunged, or bitten another person or another dog? Maybe your dog hasn't, but you've been on the other end of that behavior and you know it is not fun. Well, this episode is worth listening to. I'm so excited because joining me today is my early dog training mentor, Michael Shikashio, who still very much influences how and why I work on behavior cases. Today, Mike travels the world as an internationally renowned expert on aggression in dogs. He's a sought-after keynote speaker and presenter whose expertise has been shared through conferences, universities, educational organizations, other platforms, and national and international media. Let's face it, it's hard to talk about aggression without his name coming into it. Mike offers the most comprehensive course for dog trainers and dog behavior consultants, now offering a course for companion dog owners. I can't wait to see him at his annual Aggression in Dogs conference later this year. But first, he's joining me today, and who better to deep dive with me into a discussion about understanding aggression than Mike? Are you ready to learn? Well, let's get started. Mike, this is so exciting for me to have you here. I feel like we've come so full circle. You were the one who got me involved in dog training to begin with, like over 10 years ago.
Yeah, I know. I'm really excited to be here. First of all, thanks for having me on. And yeah, was it an APDT conference we met at, right? Was it an IWC? I think it was an APDT conference,
APDT,
right?
yeah, you were volunteering for IAABC.
Yes, yeah. I was running the booth
I
at
remember,
the trade show. Yeah.
yeah, I had been studying behavior, but I did not have the confidence to do anything professionally. And you kept coming up to me, Lisa, we really need you to do dog training. And I
Yeah.
said, no, I don't think so. And then eventually you wore me down and I said, well, if you would mentor me. And you said, of course. And
Yeah, yeah, and here we are now. Like one thing led to another. It's been, I think it was more than 10 years ago, which is scary to think of how time flies so quickly.
yeah, not only that, but you just were so encouraging to me. And that's how you are to everybody now. And now you're specializing, and now you've gotten me even interested in doing lots of behavior stuff. So that's a lot of what I do now, and I think you have a big reason for that.
Well,
So,
I appreciate it, and I appreciate your trust in me too. So,
aw, I just think you're wonderful. It's great. The whole world gets to benefit from you now. So when I knew I mean, not when I knew you, but when we first met, you were not a specialist in aggression back then, but what made
yeah,
you specialize in aggression?
I think I just liked it a lot. I know it's not for everyone. I think you have to have some, I guess stupidity, some lack of fear, doing things that sometimes you're working with dogs that it could be, pretty dangerous or you have to be careful with. But I actually enjoy helping the dogs that, are often misunderstood the most because of their aggressive behavior. So, society places that label on dogs, aggressive dog or vicious dog or Cujo and those things. And I find that's terribly unfair for most dogs because they're often just having a hard time. They're fearful of something or just expressing basic needs. And their aggressive behavior is quite normal in those contexts. So I found that many of those dogs that needed help were also misunderstood. And I thought, what better way to help these dogs than to really learn about aggression and take on the cases first and foremost, but then it turned into educating others about aggression and aggression in dogs. So it's been quite the journey. But it really started with the fostering. When I was fostering dogs, there was a lot of dogs coming in to rescues, and they would ask the fosters, me being a foster home at the time, you start off with easy dogs. They usually send you like a, 4-year-old lab that's house trained, no problems at all, just happens to be in rescue. And then you start getting the more difficult ones, dogs that might bark a little more, and then a little more difficult, dogs barking, lunging on leash. And then so next thing you know, you got some dogs that with a bite history, and you're really just, it's a great way to learn though, because they're living with you in your home, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with your family and your other pets. And so it's not only a great learning experience, it's extremely rewarding when you can help a dog like that stay out of rescue or stay out of more unfortunate situations and watch them get adopted because, you just gave them the time and understanding they needed in a foster environment. So that's how I got hooked and started just taking a deep dive into training and then eventually just doing strictly aggression cases.
What do you think it takes probably, a certain kind of person to be able to see through that and to see the qualities in the dogs? I know
Yeah, it's
yeah.
because it's like I don't know. It's kind of like you're in your neighborhood and everybody's flipping you off or swearing at you, and you can get sort of this false impression. And so same thing can happen with dogs. If you experience a lot of dogs, you've been bitten by a dog or you've been attacked as a child, or there's sometimes really skewed lenses based on our experiences. So I find dogs sometimes we need to look past our perceptions and what our opinions are and look at what the dog is experiencing, just like we look at another person rather than blaming them for maybe getting snippy with us or yelling at us. Sometimes it can do better if we just say, what is this person going through? So I just apply the same to dogs, because once you do that really can help you work with the dogs without feeling insulted if they're growling at you or barking at you or trying to bite you. I think that's a very common thing we see, right? When somebody has a dog showing aggression towards them, they take offense to it. So it's always better to start from a place of understanding.
A lot of big emotions when you've got a dog with a
Mhm.
behavioral issue, whether it's
Yeah.
embarrassment or fear or anger,
Yep.
frustration.
Absolutely. Especially if the dog is biting their guardian, or showing aggression towards their guardian, and because it goes back to the how dare you bite the hand that feeds you kind of mentality. I give you all your toys and food and take care of you, and you show aggression towards me, how dare you kind of mindset. But oftentimes once we work to understand what the dog is doing that for, it could be a lot of times it's pain. That's one of the most common reasons for aggression directed at guardians. Their own guardian is pain or resource guardian. They're just trying to keep something of value. Probably the top two reasons if I had to put a number on, or kind of categorize which ones I see the most. So that could be, again, feel really difficult for the guardian saying, why is my dog coming after me? I'm the one that gives it all the love and everything it needs. But again, something like pain is a very common or a very understandable, I should say, reason for a dog to display aggression. Just like people would. If we're in pain, we're going to lash out. It doesn't matter who touches us. So, so yeah. Again, understanding is a big part of it.
One of my cases right now is pain related. We're suspecting,
Hmm.
working with a veterinary behaviorist with her and the different instances, whether it's being touched or just, moving very slowly, the pace that he's moving, not jumping up on furniture, lots of different signs that
Yeah.
pointing us into that
Yeah, yeah.
direction.
I think it's for the listeners, if you're experiencing issues with your dog showing aggression in, especially if they're touched or you ask them to move from a certain location or they're hesitating to do something and you kind of try to physically get them to do it, always look at underlying pain or discomfort issues because it's so highly underdiagnosed in aggression cases. And we think what a tragic outcome when a dog's just experiencing pain, but nobody's noticing. And maybe people are resorting to punishment or something else to try to get the dog to do what they want. But the dog's just trying to communicate, hey, I'm hurting here. And you keep making me hurt or doing things that cause me pain. Even though I know you don't mean to, you're still doing it.
Yeah.
And that's my reason for showing aggression. So always look for underlying pain issues in those cases.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So many people I hear, they talk about, well, my aggressive dog, or, oh, just such an aggressive animal, or doing really aggressive things, or it's aggression. What are your thoughts on those labels?
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. Aggressive dog is a label. Even though, again, my business name is aggressivedog.com, people search for that because it's just been the label used for decades when people see a dog barking and lunging. But we have to differentiate that between behavior. So I always start to steer my clients towards, okay, we think of aggression, we don't think of the dog being aggressive. We look at the behaviors the dog is displaying as aggressive behaviors. And I define aggression simply as behavior used to increase distance from or eliminate a threatening or provocative stimulus. So something that the dog just wants to go away. It's just a fancy way of saying, I need this thing to get away from me because I'm threatened by it, or I'm afraid of it, or it's threatening my resources, or, it's so, when you think of it that way, then we're not labeling the dog into one category. We don't say funny dog, right? Or, we don't hear that label, but it would be the same thing. Assigning a particular personality trait is no dog is aggressive 100% of the time. They're not showing aggression 100% of the time. So, and in fact, most of them are very far and few in between. So once we look at the behaviors, then we can start to understand the dog and look at the root causes. So for me, aggression or aggressive behaviors, there's almost a real important root cause we need to address in order to change the behaviors. So if we don't, then you sometimes won't touch the behaviors. Just like pain, right? If I don't address the pain, a dog's going to respond almost reflexively in a lot of cases when it's in pain. So if we don't address the root cause, you won't actually ever fix the issue. So you'll see those aggressive behaviors surface. So the barking, lunging, growling, snarling, snapping, or biting behaviors surface because of those root causes. So that's why I stress understanding not only just the observable behaviors and not labeling the dog, but then really digging into the root cause. Because when people are struggling with dog behavior problems like pulling on leash or jumping up on visitors, sometimes we're not so focused on the root cause because it's not necessarily a negative balanced emotion or something like, dog jumping up on guests could be just a happy-go-lucky lab. We're not saying, okay, this dog is fearful or this dog is, in pain in most cases. Oftentimes the dog's just happy to see grandma coming over, right? And that's why the dog is jumping up. The dog is motivated. Their motivation is to say hello or to get that attention. And then they get reinforced oftentimes by grandma petting the dog while it's jumping up, right? So, but aggression is much different. It's often fueled by some negative balanced emotion or some negative association. So we have to address those in order to change the behavior versus a dog that's doing things like jumping up on the counter. Again, we're not necessarily worried about some root cause other than dog's just happy getting that turkey sandwich. So let's just teach them to sit or fall paws on the floor. We can teach alternative behaviors much more commonly in those kind of cases. So long-winded answer to what aggression is and the difference between, why I don't use the label aggressive dog with my clients. It's important just to look at behaviors and then look at the root cause for those behaviors.
Yeah. And what's so important and what you've really, really taught me is that there's the training piece and then there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes into it too.
Yes.
Looking at the environment and, are the dog's needs being met and all kinds of other things that are impacting behavior too.
Yes.
So when I hear people talk about online that they're looking for somebody to train that out of their dog or to, we've got to correct the dog because I want my dog to be safe and he can't be doing this. What would you say to the public who's listening to this as far as kind of some of the fallout or your thoughts and insight on those kinds of interpretations?
Yeah, and that's again a very normal human response and kind of way of thinking of solving a problem. We want it to stop. We use that word stop. I need my dog to stop biting. Well, that's a reasonable goal, certainly. And in realistic, thinking is we don't want our dog biting anybody, but our mind goes to stopping behavior. I want him to stop jumping up. I want him to stop barking. I want him to stop pulling on leash. And all reasonable goals. However, that doesn't teach the dog what to do instead. So oftentimes we've seen this history of punishment with dogs where we try to say, okay, if I need to stop the dog from barking, I can, in the old days, it'd be like, get a rolled up newspaper or squirt the dog or use a shaker can full of pennies, those kind of old ways of doing those things. Sure, you might stop the barking for a moment, and you might even stop it for quite some time because punishment does work. However, and this is a big however, is that there's a risk of a negative association being created. And so the dog can start to learn, okay, when I see somebody outside, let's say the delivery driver, somebody dropping off packages, and I bark, and then somebody takes a rolled up newspaper towards me, or they throw a shaker can or something like that. If you do that enough times, that runs a high risk of the dog starting to associate, wait a minute, all delivery drivers predict this negative event. And all the dog is trying to do is just say, hey, there's somebody here. Things that we've selected for as humans for many, many centuries, if not thousands of years, of saying, hey, if there's an intruder on our territory here, our property, let me know. And so now we're saying, don't do that anymore through hundreds of years of genetics and evolution. We're saying, all right, don't bark anymore. And it's totally unfair for the dog to say, don't bark or else I'm going to punish you. But the risk is, all right, now the dog's saying, all right, all UPS drivers are terrible. So next time I see a UPS driver, I'm going to let somebody know that he's got to go. And it can turn into biting or even redirected aggression towards the guardian in some cases because the dog's saying, all right, I needed this person to go. I really hate when UPS people come over because then I get hit with a newspaper and I'm going to try to stop that, but I can't because this guy's outside my front door. So now I'm super frustrated. So I'm going to take it out on you as the guardian. And so those are a lot of the fallouts or side effects we can see. And I see it quite often when people resort to punishment to stop a behavior. So the goal really is, again, not only addressing the root cause, but teaching the dog what you want them to do instead. So let's say it is that pain-based case, right? So we have the guardian getting bitten. We have to address that pain first and foremost. But let's say we've got the dog on the couch and we want them, you've got, maybe let's say it's an armchair and you don't have one seat and the dog's taking it up. But the dog's taking it up because it's very comfortable. It's like this fancy new Tempur-Pedic recliner you got or something. And so the dog's like, this is amazing. It helps my arthritis. But then the guardian's like, no, you got to move. You need to stop being on this furniture. So there's that stop word again, right?
Yeah.
But what the goal is not only to address that pain, but we have to teach an alternative behavior. Well, hey, here's another Tempur-Pedic fancy dog bed. I just got you. And we're going to put it right next to my recliner. And that's the alternative behavior. Just go here. And we'll meet your needs of a comfy space. We'll teach you an alternative place. And we're not going to pair any negative associations because I'm going to teach you using positive reinforcement. And so it's a win-win-win situation because the person gets their chair back, the dog has a place to rest, and there's no negative associations created. And in fact, there's a positive association being created. Dog's like, I love this new dog bed because I get also treats here.
Yeah.
And so it really just is, it's really important to break that cycle of punishment because of the risks. Because there's so few risks when you use positive reinforcements. There's just so many more risks when you use punishment to stop behaviors.
And I love the teaching of alternative behaviors. Another client comes to mind, a pretty complicated one, a big shepherd mix. And among his different triggers and issues were, in the kitchen, hoarding around other people and, and then getting in potentially dangerous situations. So we're teaching him to go and station on a bed when people are in the kitchen, and he was loving it. Having a lot of fun because it's fun on that bed.
Yep.
Good stuff happens on that bed. So I love that approach. The other thing that brings to mind is something that some people may not be familiar with, and that's the term of flooding. And so when you think that you're really helping, like for example, you make your dog sit when scary stuff goes around, and then the dog eventually stops reacting, is the dog really feeling better, or is the dog going into a different state? Um,
Exactly. Yeah. It's that's also very common, especially dogs that are fearful. You know, they're put into environments where it's just too much. The analogy I use with my clients all the time is just the swimming pool analogy, especially somebody that's afraid of water. So let's say they had a issue, they got scared when they were kids, so they're really afraid of water, and I take them to swimming pool. One side's the typical like Olympic swimming pool. One side's like shallow. Well, typical in-ground pool. Let's say one side's shallow, one side's really deep. And flooding is the equivalent of just shoving them into the deep end and saying, "Okay, go for it. Let's see if you can swim or not." And it's not really on you. And that's the equivalent of doing the same thing with dogs. If we put them in environments they're not ready for yet, so we have to start out on that shallow end, and it may just be like tipping a toe in that water, so that person feels comfortable. Really important aspect, because we can make things a lot worse. You know, something called sensitization, which is when the dog is hyper aware of their environment now and everything really affects them. And it can look like it works because the dog sometimes just shuts down saying, all right, I'm just going to freeze here and hope for the best. Just like maybe a person in the deep end of the pool, they don't know what to do and they stop actually trying to swim. They just, sink because they have no other mechanism, no other choice. So same thing can happen with dogs, is they just stop showing, the negative behaviors that we were trying to address. And it looks like it works for us because like, oh, now the dog's not barking or lunging, but they miss like the dog's ears are pinned back. The dog's mouth is closed really tight. They're, have dilated pupils and they're just having a really tough time. So it can look like it works. And the same thing would happen with punishment, by the way, is that it stops. Yeah, sure, we can suppress the behavior, but it doesn't mean that the dog's feeling any better. And that's
yeah,
what we have to recognize is, yeah, we can stop behavior. We can take a big enough hammer to that nail, right? But it's not going to make the dog feel better. And after all, we want our dogs to feel great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Quality of life is where
Yes.
it's at. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, when we talk about, kind of a breaking the aggression cycle, and what a big thing is the management piece
Hmm.
to this. Talk about the importance of management and why that's absolutely critical piece of helping to overturn this aggression cycle.
Yeah. So when we look at behavior, it's really important to think about reinforcement and how reinforcement works. So if there's a good outcome for the dog and it makes something go away, that is highly reinforcing because safety is more important than food and water and sleep. A dog needs to, people too. Safety is first and foremost. So, and the people can understand this when, I say, oh, I've got $1 million in a briefcase for you. You want it? And I'll give it right to you now. And most people are like, sure. But, if you're falling out of an airplane with no parachute, and then I try to hand you that briefcase, you're not going to be very interested in it anymore because safety comes first. So you would you rather have this $1 million in a briefcase or the parachute in my other hand? So same thing for dogs. Safety is really the most crucial aspect. Now, when we think about reinforcement history, when a dog makes something scary go away, barking, lunging, growling, biting, that is highly reinforcing for the dog. So it's most likely it takes just one time. The dog's like, I remember that worked to keep me safe. So I'm just going to keep doing that. Just like the person's like, I'm going to make sure I put a parachute on before I go out. Right. And so when we think about management, it's prevention of rehearsal of the behavior. So the dog doesn't get reinforced for practicing those undesirable behaviors to us humans, which is barking, lunging, growling, snarling, snapping, or biting in most cases. And if we don't prevent that, then the dog's going to keep going right back to what worked.
Yeah.
And the other thing to think about is that we really don't ever make it go away. Like we don't say, all right, it's fixed. The dog's never going to show an aggressive response again, because just like a human, it's like, all right, when you're in enough pain, I don't want you to do anything ever again because I've taught you something else or I've suppressed it or whatever. It's going to come out naturally, so aggression is going to, in many contexts, is very normal behavior for it to surface. So I tell my clients, we never fix it. We never turn off aggression. We just make it much less likely for it to happen because we've prevented rehearsal through management. We've helped the dog feel better around whatever it is. We've addressed the root cause and we've taught alternative behaviors in that context. The dog can still go back to showing the aggressive behavior, but we've made it much less likely because of all those other things we did. So that's where management comes into play. It's just we have to really be careful about allowing the dog to display those behaviors because we've set them up on in the wrong stage, so to speak. So, and I know that's difficult. Some listeners are probably like, oh, what if I live in the city and I've got a dog that's reactive on leash and barking at everything? I get it. It's difficult to control. But we can be creative as much as possible to significantly reduce the exposures to those triggers. And when we do that, that's good management, and the better management we can get, the less likely is we're going to continue reinforcing it. And we're also reducing the cumulative stress that can happen when management isn't good.
Just going to point that out. Yeah.
Yeah. So lots of stressors and chronic stress we know now is very detrimental for dogs, both their learning capabilities as well as their health. So when I see some clients, they're just struggling in environments where the dog is constantly getting, they're barking out the window, they're barking at every little noise. They don't get any time to process things, to de-stress, so to speak. That actually creates more of a vicious cycle. It's just, now the dog's more stressed and now they're barking more and the client's yelling at them more and they're barking more and the client. So yeah. And that's where, again, management can really reduce the amount of stress that the dog is experiencing. So yeah, management is the first step I take in my cases when I'm starting to offer suggestions. Let's look at management first, then we'll get into the behavior change strategies too.
Love that. I hear you, how you on that. And so many times I see that when we put a really good management into play and we're giving a stress vacation, a couple weeks later and I go back, we see some major changes in the dog just because of those changes that they've made. And that is pretty incredible. Gives us a brain that we can work with. And
you just, when you take a dog or a human and change their environments, they say behavior is in the environment, right? And behavior is contextual, but also I think not just behavior. It's the welfare is very environment dependent. So it's the same thing for people. You might see behaviors change simply by reducing the stress and increasing the human or dog's enrichment needs, as well as, changing the environment. So we're less likely to see the problem behavior. So sometimes because people think about training, like, oh, sit down, stay calm, we got to teach the dog this and that. And yes, those are important in many cases. But really for aggression cases, so much more has to do with the other things we were talking about, addressing the health, making sure the dog's living a good quality of life, low stress, lots of enrichment, choice of control and agency in the environment. Those things matter, relationship with the guardian, often so much more than, let's teach this dog to go station on a mat instead of barking at the front door. Yes, that can work. But if you, again, take a step back and look at the big picture, sometimes we can miss something really important.
Yeah. Great. Let's, you know what, you talked several times about resource guarding and that being a major factor with some aggression cases and many aggression cases. So talk to our audience about how common that is for resource guarding and when should somebody be concerned about resource guarding?
Yeah. So let me define resource guarding first. It's dog using behavior. It doesn't have to be always the classic lunging, growling, biting behavior. Just dog using behavior to maintain access to an item or what's called a resource that it doesn't want to lose. So it could be food, toys, bones, resting spots. It could be people. I include territory as sort of under that umbrella of resource guarding as well. It's just a dog protecting something of value and using behavior to do so. So that is my definition of resource guarding. And when you think about it, it is normal behavior. It is abnormal for me not to see some resource guarding in dogs to some degree. So it's not always just the growling, sort of those behaviors. It may be just the dog eating faster or the dog putting their body in front of something a little bit more when they see something approaching. So it's not always overt. And that's important to remember because, again, it is normal behavior. And when we go back to the human analogy and we think about how humans behave, this equivalent of the dog maybe just putting their body closer to the item or putting it in between whoever's coming closer to them and the item is the equivalent of somebody locking their door at night. How many people do that? I think most of the listeners, or maybe so you're walking down a place where there's potential pickpockets, or there's it's a dark alley. What are we going to do with our wallet or our purse? We're going to maybe hold it a little closer to us, or just check do the little pocket tap for that to check the wallet. Is the wallet there? Yeah, it's there. Let me just make sure it's nice and snug here. So that's resource guarding, right? A resource competition can happen too. So we saw during the pandemic, everybody scrambling, fighting over hand sanitizer and toilet paper. Right? And dogs would probably look at us like, "Are you guys crazy? What are you competing over? Like this thing that smells like alcohol? It's terrible. Like, well, what's the point?" So we have to think about, like, for dogs, some things are important to them that may not be to us. It could be another animal's poop and enough to fight over with another animal. And as humans, we're like, oh, that's so disgusting. For dogs, they're like, this is gold here. So that is what resource guarding is, just keeping access to things. And the vast majority of dogs do it to some extent, to some small degree. And we may not notice. And they may be doing it right in front of us. So very important to recognize that if a dog's guarding something, there's no need to punish them at all. They're just, and vast majority of times, I'm thanking them. Thanks for growling as I walk by this, animal carcass that I find disgusting, but you find absolutely delightful. You growled and you let me know that that's valuable to you. Well, thank you. Instead of biting me, right? I'll take all those things. I'll take growling, snarling, lunging, whatever. I'm like, thank you for letting me know you're uncomfortable with me because you've got something of super high value. Just like if I had a dog that tends to chew on paper and I've just got a stack of $100 bills or something next to me, what am I going to do? Right? Same exact thing. So, it's, and I understand when it can be concerning. Obviously, if dogs that bite or start to go towards, use aggression towards other household or animals in the home, or people in the home, kids especially, that can, of course, be problematic and dangerous in some cases. So what do? We go to management, right? There's that keyword of management, and then addressing and changing the association for the dog. We make positive associations when that person approaches or when that child happens to be in the same room. And we just pair there. Oftentimes it's very straightforward. We're just pairing a positive association with that trigger in the environment. Hey, good things happen. A whole handful of treats come flying at you, really high value treats, anytime this person shows up. And you just keep rinsing and repeating that. And as soon as you know, it's just like the person that's showing up at your front step when you've locked your door because you're getting tired of the solicitors, but that person just keeps trying, ringing, and then next thing you know, you open the door, they're handing you a bundle of $100 bills. Next thing you know, you're going to be like, there they come again. Maybe you have a Ring camera, it goes off. You're going to go running to that door to open it and be like, what do you got for me today?
Yeah.
So that's how we change the association. Same thing for dogs as we could do for people.
So you see the dog growling, you say, thank you, and then you give them space.
Yeah. And know that next step, I have to manage this because I recognize that, hey, I'm cooking in the kitchen, I'm busy, and I'm feeding my dog in the kitchen. I just happen to walk by, and they growled at me. So what's the management step? Well, we can maybe feed them further outside the kitchen or in another location so they don't feel threatened just because I'm trying to cook dinner for myself in the kitchen or something like that. And then we could take it a step further, and we can take some of what we're cooking in the kitchen and bring it over to the dog while they're eating in the other space, and they start working on the behavior change strategy. And next thing you know, the dog's like, this is great. I love when you're coming near me now when I'm eating because it always predicts good things. Yeah. So again, it's usually a very straightforward, simple way or type of behavior issue to treat and to work with. It's, again, just understanding we have to avoid the punishment, because that, when you think about that analogy, is that if that person coming over to your front door when you've just locked it does the opposite, you don't answer the door, they start banging harder, or they bang the door down and say, give me that, it's mine, I'm the boss, or, I'm the dominant one, or something like that, that's going to make a real negative association for you. So what do you think you're going to do next as that homeowner? Right? It can escalate very quickly. So that's why I want to really avoid it, and especially in resource guarding cases, because it's terrible to punish a dog for something that's normal. It's like punishing a dog for breathing.
Right.
Right.
That's a great analogy. So in our household conflict,
Mhm.
is it okay for people to let the dogs sort it out on their own?
Mm. That's a interesting question because that was a very common myth. If two dogs have issues, let them work it out on their own. Um, and that, when you think about it, really, it doesn't make any sense because if we were just going to let them work it out on their own, then we wouldn't have to actually think about letting them work it out on their own, right? Because they would have already worked it out on their own. They would have had that opportunity. It usually gets to the point of fighting, so there is no working out. It's already gotten to the point of oftentimes damaging kind of conflicts. So that being said, there is a gray area because we have to understand it's normal canine communication. So, for instance, you have a new puppy and you have an adult dog, and that adult dog's chewing on their bone or eating their food, and that adult dog growls says, at the puppy when the puppy approaches, and the puppy's like, "Ooh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that," and then you never see it happen again. That's normal communication. So that, in a sense, is a way of letting the dogs work it out, but it's not planned to do that. Meaning, we're not saying, okay, it's a free for all fight club here. It is, there is normal communications between dogs that we can recognize. And the way to tell if the communication is going well between the animals is to see a less frequency of those behaviors that we find problematic. Is if we see an escalation or frequency of the growling behavior, then we know we're not going in the right direction. Or if we see it escalate to growling and air snapping, and we don't see a change over time to less frequency and less intensity, then we know we need to intervene into the case. And it's usually even before that. My recommendation is not to suppress all communication between the animals, but also be a referee sometimes. We need to help sometimes say, okay, I see you guys are giving each other a stink eye over this bone or whatever, so let me intervene, let me manage things so you guys can feel safe here. And it becomes predictable for you, and there's less anxiety when things become predictable. So yeah, I think it's a question that, as we say, it depends. It depends on what the dogs are doing already.
Yeah. Yeah, it depends.
Yeah.
See, we use a lot. As someone I do a lot of work with young kids
Hmm.
and do education classes with kids around dogs, and
Hmm.
also I'm a licensed family paws educator. So this is a big one for me. When we're talking about households with young kids, the management becomes even more critical. How much, I also hear a lot of parents saying we want to teach our kids what to do and what not to do, but we
Hmm.
can't really rely just on the kids, can we? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Um, Management is the key word. When you have kids, especially much younger children that aren't going to be consistent in listening to your directions or what you want them to do, management is going to be an absolute necessity, because if not, the dog might practice the most undesirable behavior, same as the children. And so it's our job as the adults to really be managing things well, refereeing well, being observant, and also cognizant of when it can be problematic. With there's, let's say, not a lot of management, or 10 kids in a home with 10 dogs or something that can be really difficult to manage. So I would say with kids, I'm really careful with, if there's any kind of history of aggression, I have to see really good management from the client to continue moving, because I want to make sure I'm taking into account the welfare of the child, of course. So, management, can't stress it enough. If we don't see it enough, then there potentially will be a problem. So that's first and foremost. And then oftentimes it's just time. The dog's like, all right, you've got my back. You're keeping me safe here. This little bobble-headed kid that's running around the house, tripping on things and falling over on top of me, now can no longer do that, at least for the most part. So now I feel much safer. My anxiety's gone down. My stress has gone down. And I trust this kid more, but I trust you too, as the parent, to be able to help manage this. So Yeah, so that's I think the most important part. And then, yes, you can help dogs feel better about children, just like we can help children learn what to do around dogs. But you can't rely on either of those parties to be 100% reliable in that aspect. That's where, again, good parenting and good observation is still crucial for those kind of cases.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I've got just another thing. So people talk about, first of all, problems with strangers coming onto the property.
Mm.
And also, I hear a lot, oh, my dog's just trying to protect me. And that can be too when they're outside and somebody comes up. My dog is trying to protect me, and that's what's going on. Want to talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
I hear that a lot. I will say
Yeah.
that. Clients, I think he's just trying to protect me when they're out on a leash with their dog and dogs are sparking at strangers. And that can be true, but in rare cases. So I
Yeah.
often have to break it to him. Well, it's nice that he might be trying to protect you. However, he's probably trying to just protect himself at that point, So, and that's, you have to kind of break that news to some clients that, they think it's because it's endearing. It feels nice that dog's trying to protect them. But many times it's just the dog afraid for their own safety. It's not to say they wouldn't be protective of their person in some cases. It's that vast majority of times they're just worried about whatever's approaching them. And much of the reason outside the home is because the dog is on leash. So they're restricted in how much they can escape from that thing. So the leash prevents them that escape option, which is technically the flight option, right? And we've all heard that fight flight. So if we remove that flight option, then we're often left with fight or freeze or fidget, but it's often fight. Dog's going to start barking and lunging at something that it wouldn't maybe necessarily off leash. So it's so with dogs that it looks like they're protecting the person, always assess like how does this dog do with another person. How does the dog do in the same context if there's no guardian around, it's just strangers. And you can test that, but usually the history will tell you all of that. You don't have to set the dog up for failure or anything like that. And oftentimes you can even see that during your training sessions. You can start to see the dog, is it truly protecting the person. You'll know because you'll start to see those little signatures come up. It can look like the dog body blocking, meaning the dog's getting in front of the oncoming trigger or person. It can be how the dog's body language looks, so high flagging tail, ears forward, hard stare, agonistic pucker sometimes, all these, which is like the lips of the mouth going into a C shape and showing the teeth. Those can sometimes be more indicative of a dog truly protecting their person. But it's rare again, and it's usually only certain breeds of dogs. Now, any dog could move towards, I'm going to truly protect my person from a threat. Sure, I'll protect myself, but I'm more worried about protecting my person. Any dog can fall into that category, but you're going to see it more prevalently in certain breeds that have been selected for that over, again, many generations. So it could be your Dobermans or your German Shepherds, your Belgian Malinois, so dogs selected for working that task. You probably will see more likelihood of the dog truly protecting the person. But, if you assess for it, most of the time you're going to find out this dog also does this when the dog walker is walking them, or Uncle Bob is walking, or you're walking them as a trainer, or somebody else is, or, so that's true owner guarding or protection. The other is technically a form of resource guarding. And then I think you mentioned territory, right? So I should probably talk about strangers on property. That can be born out of a lot of different reasons. Again, it's all about good assessment. So, for instance, a dog might look like it's protecting the property, but maybe they're just fearful of people. And maybe the dog is more likely to do it on property because they've practiced it there much more, and they feel maybe a little bit more confident to do that versus when they're off property. So you see less prevalence of it, but it's the dog just still afraid of people. So that may be it. Sometimes it is the dog protecting the property, the dog saying, this is my territory, I want you to go away. So it could be that. It could be the dog protecting other resources on the property. It's like, all right, now you're coming into my home and now you're near my stuff. It's near the front door. It could be protection of the people. It could be protection of other pets in there. There's a lot of different reasons for it to happen on property. And again, one way to do it is just get a good assessment. Look at the history, and you'll see a history of, all right, the dog only does it on property, no matter who's around, no matter what resources are around, and that'll give you the answer versus a dog who might do it off property, on property, around certain people. The dog shows ears pulled back and tail tucked. That's probably much more driven by the emotion of fear. The dog's just afraid of whatever it is. So, yeah, it's kind of easy to miss. I don't want to say diagnose. Determine the. It's kind of easier to make mistakes determining the cause if you don't really look at the history and make a proper assessment. Because if we don't have the right cause and we start addressing it like it's something else, we're going to go in the wrong direction in some cases. We might give the wrong behavior plan. So that's why I keep going back to really try to figure out the cause. Why is the dog? What's the function of the behavior, as they say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this has been so helpful. I'm sure for a lot of people, we covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, lots of great topics, lots of good questions too.
Yeah, I'm so glad we could do this. Really, really appreciate your time. I know you were just, and that's pretty valuable these days. You're all over the world on any given day.
Yeah, well, this is a good time of year for me. I've been off. I've got about a month and a half off from travel. So yeah, but I am on the road at least twice a month most of the year. So yeah, it's good to be home and be able to chat and catch up on some things too. So
can't wait to see you in person in September, Aggression in Dogs Conference. That's going to be awesome.
Yes. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so very, very much for being here and sharing all this wonderful information for people. I hope it's going to be a help for tons of people out there.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Lisa.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to my podcast. Come back often and tell your friends. If I can be of any help to you and your pet, please reach out to me via my website, www.somuchpotential.com. And for a lot more information, fun, and videos, please follow me, So Much Potential, on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. See you soon.